Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Eleanor. I am one of the programme heads at the Nuffield Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar today, which is all about how you can apply to us for funding. So if you are a researcher or a practitioner working at a university or a research organisation or a charity, or maybe you're a research manager or a research administrator who works with researchers looking for grant funding, then you are in the right place, because we're going to tell you all about who we are, the kind of work that we're interested in, and how you can apply to us for funding. Now, we've got a really great lineup for you today. We're kicking off with Tim, our CEO, who's going to be telling you all about how the kind of work we fund can make a difference to people's lives. And then we're going to be talking you through some of our research priorities in education, welfare and justice, as well as explaining some of the cross-cutting themes which go right across our different research interests. And then we get on to the most important part, how you can apply to us for funding and what you can expect from working with us. And we're really delighted to be joined by Professor Emma Hitchings from the University of Bristol, who's going to be telling us all about her experience of applying to us for funding, receiving funding, and working with us as one of our grant holders. We're then going to hear from Leonie, who is our Grants Operations Manager, who's going to be talking us through the application process. So in terms of what we look for in applications, how applications are assessed, and how we can support you to apply for one of our outline application rounds, which happen in March and September every year. It's then going to be time for our live Q&A session, and I'm going to be joined by Josh, Alex and Ash from Education, Welfare and the Justice teams, and we're going to be taking some of your questions live. So please do send us your questions through the Q&A box. You can start submitting them at any time, so don't be shy, get your questions in early. And we've also got a team of staff from across the Nuffield Foundation who are poised at their laptops, ready to answer your questions through the Q&A box by text. So please do get your questions into us as soon as you can. Before we kick off, there's a couple of important things to mention. The first is that we have subtitles set up for our presentations, and we also have a live captioner doing captions, and you can turn these on by clicking on the CC button and then clicking Show Captions. We also have a chat box where we're going to be posting some useful links and email addresses and things like that, but that's not the place to ask questions. Please put your questions through the Q&A box function. And don't worry if your question doesn't appear when you type it. We have seen your question. We'll just be posting them as soon as they are answered. So let's get started. We hope you enjoy the webinar.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, whether you're listening to this live or watching on the video on Catch Up. I'm Tim Gardam, Chief Executive of the Nuffield Foundation, and today is meant to be very practical, to give anyone who applies to Nuffield a clear picture of what we fund, what we expect of a grant holder, and why we, as a charitable foundation whose aim is advancing social well-being, believe funding research is a worthwhile way of doing this. In a nutshell, the Nuffield Research Portfolio combines the most rigorous analytical understanding of the data with a curiosity to encounter and listen to the experience of those whose lives make up those data. So let me say a little about how we relate to our grant holders. We are a responsive funder. We don't want to determine the research questions you're going to examine. We recognise that just because we have the funding, it doesn't mean we have the best ideas. But we are also a proactive funder in this sense. We engage with our grant holders to enhance their work. We use our experience in events and public affairs to pull together the findings that might otherwise get lost in academic journals, and we help you bring them to wider attention. Our three principal areas of research interest are education, justice and welfare, and the interconnections between them, because that's what makes us distinctive. Educational opportunity, from the earliest years to the transition to the world of work. Welfare, that interaction of macro and microeconomic and social pressures on communities and on people's domestic lives, especially those of the most disadvantaged. And access to the justice system, in the end the arbiter of individual rights in relation to the state. Now, the research we fund, whether strategic in scope or on a smaller scale, shares certain things in common. Above all, our belief in its potential to generate evidence capable of bettering individual life chances in a world of increasing inequality, and improving the security, prosperity, and well-being of families and communities across the United Kingdom. Now, we do this by enabling a better understanding of the factors that serve to hold people back, and which shed new light on the causes of disadvantage and disparity that people are subject to over the course of their lives. From the foundations of a child's early years development to the fundamental significance of the education system in realizing potential, to the specific vulnerabilities faced by older people in an aging society, the Nuffield Foundation funds research that has the potential to improve policy and practice across the generations. We also have a broad interest in the wider social and economic factors that shape our lives, from the world of work and the way it impacts on our livelihoods, via automation and globalization, through the economic insecurity of the gig economy, to the risks and outcomes that relate to where someone is born and raised. And then there's the role that intersectionality plays in compounding disadvantage. How and why people are affected differently depending on their class, their gender, or their ethnicity, or whether they have a disability. We also have a core interest in the impact of scientific and technological developments on social well-being. There's a lot more to do on the impact of artificial intelligence and developments in bioscience, the opportunities as well as the risks, and how we might mitigate the potential for digital technologies to exacerbate existing inequalities. We also encourage our grant holders to anticipate emerging trends and future shocks. How can we ensure that the next generation has the skills it needs to flourish in a changing world of work? What is the impact of demography? And what are the links between a productive and a caring society? How can often polarized communities navigate issues arising from migration and integration? And at the foundations of a just society, access to the justice system itself, the platform upon which any social contract must depend. Our best research provides that shock of understanding about the sort of society we're becoming. We need the arresting perspectives that new and diverse voices can bring. We need to hear from people, organizations, and disciplines who can bring fresh insights to bear, as well as helping to identify and plug existing gaps in the evidence base. Impact is a much-used phrase. At Nuffield, we look over the medium term. But the way I would put it is this. In 2030, what research will we look back on that we've funded in 2023 and recognise how important it was that we did just that? Nuffield's research over many years has demonstrated the power of evidence to change lives. Our charitable funding has more than doubled in 5 years. Last year, it amounted to more than £23 million. So, whether you're already an established member of the Nuffield Foundation's grant holder community, or you aspire to be Nuffield funded in the future, I hope this webinar will give you insights about our key areas of research interest, and ultimately, support you in making a successful funding application. We want to hear from you.
Hi, I'm Alex, Welfare Programme Head. Welfare is the Nuffield Foundation's broadest area of interest. Our focus is on research that aims to improve well-being for individuals, families, communities, and society. And we think of welfare, or well-being, in terms of living standards across different dimensions, including financial dimensions such as income, wealth, consumption, or housing, relational dimensions such as social connections and relationships, and physical dimensions such as mental and physical health. We are interested in the ways in which well-being can be addressed through policymaking or practice at different stages of people's lives, whether in early life or adolescence, during early years in the labour market, and right on through to retirement and later life. Your research might explore the risks to people's well-being and how these vary because of ethnicity, gender, age, or where people live. how chronic health conditions or disability affect people's life chances, and how these risks intersect or accumulate as people age. For example, we have current projects on ethnic inequalities in later life, and separately on trajectories of deprivation at local authority level across the UK. Or your research might look at how risk factors interact with the supports that people may or may not be able to draw on through work, family, community, and the state. You might explore the actions individuals take to support themselves by acquiring skills, managing their health, or saving for the future. On families, for example, we are currently funding a project that examines the impact of the benefit cap and the 2-child limit on larger families. And a research team in Edinburgh is using the Growing Up in Scotland data to explore how living with domestic violence affects children's well-being. We funded several important pandemic-related reports, including one looking at how social cohesion was affected by COVID-19, and another examining the impact of school closures on parental labour supply and family well-being. Both of these increased nationwide understanding of the pandemic, with the latter informing government decisions on the universal vaccination of children aged 12 to 15 against COVID. We're also interested in how societal and economic forces combine to impact on people's well-being. These might be technological advances, demographic shifts, economic shocks, or climate change. We want to know how all of these could affect living standards both on average and for different groups of the population. We have a current project looking at family and community vulnerabilities in the transition to net zero. And a Sheffield team has carried out interviews, focus groups and surveys to capture public views on how their personal data is used. The Economy 2030 inquiry, one of our strategic projects, is examining the impact of economic change on people, places and firms, and how such change might best be navigated. And the Institute of Fiscal Studies' Deaton Review of Inequalities, another strategic project, is exploring which inequalities matter and why. Looking forward, we'd like to encourage more applications on the impact of the cost of living crisis on people's lives. Obviously, this agenda is very broad, and we are very open to any innovative research proposals that fit within it. And I should mention that we're particularly interested in the intersection of work and family life and how technology affects both. Plus, we also have a specific focus on quality of life in later life. Your research might therefore address how family structures and dynamics intersect with the world of work. Put another way, how does the challenge of juggling work and family life, including multiple caring responsibilities, affect individual and family well-being? What policies and practices, including employer practices, might improve well-being outcomes? What role does technological change play in the lives of families or the world of work? And how might new technologies alleviate, exacerbate, or shift vulnerabilities for individuals and their families? We want to know more about what it means to live well in later life. As health and personal circumstances change, how do older people navigate different aspects of life? How might systems of care and support be better organised? And how do these challenges play out for people with specific experiences, such as those who are ageing without children, or people affected by a lifetime of multiple inequalities? Across our portfolio, the projects we support involve a range of methodological approaches. One current example uses participatory action research methods to understand children's experiences of place. Another is harnessing administrative and survey data and exploiting the staggered rollout of the automatic enrolment of pensions to better understand overall financial well-being. And the teams we currently fund include a wide variety of disciplines from across the social sciences and beyond, including data science, sociology, psychology, geography, economics, and children's literature. Whatever your discipline, we would like to hear from you.
Hi, I'm Ash Patel, the Programme Head for Justice at the Nuffield Foundation. I want to say a little bit about why the Foundation is so keen to support and fund research in the area of justice. The challenges currently facing the justice system make it more important than ever to examine who the system serves and how it operates. Lengthy case backlogs, crumbling courthouses, and a shortage of key people and resources are combining to create significant difficulties. At the same time, the courts and tribunals are undergoing a wide-ranging programme of reform, changing how justice will be delivered. For those who become involved in the justice system, the decisions made there can have major and lasting effects on their lives. But in practice, the system can be inaccessible and complicated, and many people do not feel they are equal before the law, particularly those unable to get the specialist advice and help that they need. At the Nuffield Foundation, we believe for a society to function well, it must rest on the foundations of a fair and effective justice system. That system acts as a platform for the rules, services, and interactions that support everyday social and economic life. As such, it matters to us all, whether we have direct contact with it or not. The projects we fund have the potential to improve access to justice, increase fairness, and support a more effective system by generating well-evidenced proposals for policy and practice improvement. That's why we've committed over £10 million to fund research in this area over the last 5 years. This year, we're looking to increase our support, and we would particularly welcome ambitious proposals to examine the impacts of legal problems or justice system involvement on people's wider lives and well-being. We fund work in all 4 nations of the UK, separately and comparatively. Our key themes of interest include access to and participation in justice, fairness in the decision-making process, and here we're looking at the disparity and discrimination in all its forms, individually and cumulatively, and trust and legitimacy in the institutions of justice. We take a broad view of justice and want to support that looks at, before, and beyond the workings of the courts and tribunals. We are interested in understanding the nature of people's legal problems, how they address them, including the many people who resolve their problems away from the courts and tribunals, and the outcomes that they achieve. But we also have priority areas which link strongly to the rest of the foundation, or where our support can make the most difference. We're a leading funder of family justice research, and we support research to improve processes and outcomes in both the private and public law spheres, such as Professor Liz Trinder's highly influential work on no-fault divorce. We work closely with our colleagues in the Nuffield Family Justice Observatory, not only to identify research gaps and priorities, but also to extend the reach of our grant funding research to practitioners such as social workers, lawyers and judges. Youth justice is our main area of focus within criminal justice research. We support projects looking at how and why children come into contact with the youth justice system, and how effective and fair the system is in addressing offending and responding to those children's needs. We are also keen on funding research which explores the links between different systems that might affect a child's life, such as the crossover between education and youth justice. Finally, we're interested in how people address social welfare law issues, such as problems with welfare benefits, special educational needs provision, housing or immigration. We want to see how administrative decision-making can be improved. At the Nuffield Foundation, we know the value that new and diverse views can bring. For that reason, we're always keen to hear from people, organisations and disciplines that can bring a fresh perspective to bear on issues in justice, as well as those already expert in this field. We particularly encourage applications that take an interdisciplinary approach and that connect to our other core areas of education and welfare. Above all, we want to support research that does not simply diagnose problems, but can find a route to solutions, and that can help refocus the justice system around the needs and experiences of those who rely on it.
Hello, I'm Josh Hillman, Director of Education at the Nuffield Foundation. Education has been a central part of the Foundation's work since the 60s. Our research now covers the full lifespan, from the earliest years of learning and development, through primary and secondary school, and into the complex web of opportunities and choices in education and training faced by young people and adults. We're interested in people's journeys and life chances, and how these depend on their family, social and ethnic background, their gender, where they live, and their continued experience of education. And we're interested in the policies that affect these journeys and how these might be improved or even fundamentally reformed. These include funding, governance and accountability arrangements across the various phases of education, but also admissions policies and curriculum assessment and qualification systems. We're also interested in educational practice, the actual teaching and learning that takes place in early years provision, school classrooms, colleges, workplaces, and even the home. What is effective and what isn't, and how does this vary for different types of learners and teachers? People, policies, and practice, a big agenda. So what are our priorities? We've identified 4 broad themes in education. These overlap and interplay, so some of our projects address more than one theme, or even all of them. Let me tell you where we hope each might be taken in our future work. First, we are interested in the capabilities that equip young people to thrive in education, life and work in a rapidly changing world. The long list of these capabilities includes language and literacy, numeracy, quantitative, data and digital skills. Beyond these lie broad areas like social and emotional development, analytic inquiry, problem solving, creative thinking and collaboration. Our most ambitious current education project, Skills Imperative 2035, is exploring how essential employment skills and demand for them are likely to change over the next 15 years. This will lead us to ask, what are the implications for the education system? How will the development of these and other capabilities and traits help children beginning their education during this period to flourish in all aspects of their lives ahead? How might the curriculum evolve to meet our aspirations? Do we think hard enough about education as it could be rather than how it currently is? Second, we fund projects aimed at improving the quality of teaching and learning across the education system, whether by addressing issues relating to the workforce itself or through development and evaluation of interventions and resources. Not only in schools and other providers, but also through support for parental engagement or independent or informal learning. One great example of a highly effective programme is the Nuffield Early Language Intervention, NELI, which supports children with difficulties or delays in spoken language. NELI's development drew on high-quality research. It's been trialled and evaluated at increasing scale and is now in 2/3 of English primary schools. Looking ahead to our work on the quality of teaching and learning, how can current and emerging digital technologies be best exploited and potential risks and downsides addressed? Third, we are interested in individual and structural influences on young people's pathways, choices and decisions at key points in their progress through education and training. We've built up a strong portfolio on higher education funding, access and outcomes, and we are now balancing this by developing the evidence base for other areas of the post-16 landscape, in particular vocational and technical routes such as apprenticeships and T-levels. Other topics include career guidance, local skill policies, and the role of employers. Finally, we address the various forms of disadvantage and vulnerability faced by children and young people at risk of falling behind in their learning. These include socioeconomic and geographic disadvantage, special educational needs and disabilities, experience of care, and various forms of discrimination. What challenges did these present, and how do they impact on each other? Looking ahead, we want to know more about how the full range of factors outside education influence the educational opportunities and outcomes of all children. I'm thinking of their families, housing and neighbourhood, access to technology, their nutrition and sleep, physical and mental health, and neurodiversity. The influence runs in both directions, so many of these factors are themselves swayed by education. And running across all of this are the complex interactions between genes and environment. We are blessed with fantastic data to explore these and other big themes in education, and with curiosity and expertise from many disciplinary perspectives. There are lessons to be drawn from increasing diversity in the education systems of the 4 nations of the UK, as well as from overseas. And we have a wealth of teachers with a strong desire for evidence and a willingness to try new approaches.
Hello, I'm Emily Tanner, Programme Head for Post-14 Education and Skills. As well as funding projects that sit squarely within education, welfare and justice, we also welcome applications that address trends changing and shaping society more broadly. These cut across and go beyond the three core areas. For example, we're interested in how digital technologies affect society. One aspect of this is the impact of digital transformation on employment. The Skills Imperative 2035 project estimates that millions of jobs will be affected by technology, while the Pissarides review into the future of work and well-being is investigating how automation technologies are transforming work, well-being and inequalities. The second cross-cutting theme is intersectionality, how characteristics such as gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, disability and geography combine to shape people's opportunities and life experiences. One study of care leavers' transitions into work looked at how their different characteristics affected the likelihood of a young person becoming unemployed so that support can be targeted effectively. We fund research to support well-being through different life stages and promote social inclusion across generations. This third theme includes life transitions, for example, starting school, moving from education to employment or becoming a parent, as well as living well in later life. One project is exploring ethnic inequalities among older people, including in mental and physical health, well-being and socioeconomic circumstances. The fourth theme is the social and economic implications of physical and mental disability and chronic illness. One study we funded explored how arthritis affects people over the long term and how it impacts on their employment and earnings. During the pandemic, we funded a study on food insecurity and changes in the nutritional quality of diets. This leads to the fifth theme of the long-term implications of COVID-19. During the pandemic, we funded studies on topics like the impact of school closures on families, compliance with lockdown restrictions, and differences in education attainment according to disadvantage. Now that we're in the aftermath of the pandemic, we know that the effects continue. We want to fund more research into the long-term implications for people and society. Finally, we're interested in how social policy institutions can make better use of research evidence and data in order to improve services and outcomes. Our flagship project in this area is working with local authorities to transform how children's information is gathered and used in child and family social policy. This is not an exhaustive list of our interests. We also welcome applications about other trends that affect society, including climate change, the transition to net zero, migration, and geographic inequalities. If you have a great idea, but you're not sure if it fits our interests, please get in touch to discuss.
Hello, I am Emma Hitchings from the University of Bristol. I'm leading a project funded by the Nuffield Foundation, and hopefully I can offer some insights into how the application process worked for our research team and the support the Foundation provides. But first, let me tell you about the project itself. The Fair Shares project aims to find out about the financial and property arrangements that divorcing couples make, how they come to these arrangements, and how they cope with the post-divorce setup. Despite numerous calls to reform the law on this issue, very little is known in detail about how couples negotiate their financial arrangements or how they work out. The Fair Share study will present the first detailed, fully representative picture of the position in England and Wales, importantly including information both on couples who do and do not make use of the legal system. So, how will we do this? First, an online survey of 2,000 people who have divorced in the past 5 years will provide a nationally representative picture of the kinds of arrangements people make or end up with when they divorce. Secondly, Through in-depth interviews with 50 divorcees, we have collected more detailed information on how arrangements were arrived at, what legal or other advice and support divorcees received, and how they put their plans into effect. The study is highly relevant to the real world, as it will provide essential data to inform current debates on how the law should be reformed. It will also offer practical guidance to legal advisors and providers of support services so that the needs of divorcing families can be better met in the future. It has long been recognised that the law governing post-divorce finances needs reforming. However, without robust evidence regarding how negotiations and arrangements are managed, whether made with or without legal assistance, and what the consequences are for families and children, there is no firm evidence base from which policymakers can assess what changes might be required. Our research will fill this evidence gap. We chose to apply to Nuffield because the Foundation seemed the perfect fit to fund the study. The Foundation's focus on policy-relevant and impactful research was an important element for us, as well as the fact that the Foundation staff are very knowledgeable, both in terms of methods and policy issues raised by the project. When applying for the grant, we applied to the Justice stream. Now, as anyone who has undertaken a research project in the past will know, empirical research isn't always a straightforward process. There can be a number of bumps in the road. This project has been no exception. There have been occasions where we have needed to contact the programme head, Ash Patel, directly to explain particular issues we had been having. At each point, Ash was understanding and really helpful. The Foundation has been extremely supportive when we have had to make changes to our original plans, responding promptly to each query and with helpful suggestions. These included additional contacts for us to go to for advice and information. Overall, as funders for our project, the Foundation and all its staff have been prompt, efficient, and hugely supportive.
Hi, I'm Leonie, Grants Operations Manager. I'm here to talk you through our grant application process and explain what we're looking for in a successful application. We're interested in projects of all sizes. Most of the grants we award are for between £200,000 and £300,000, but we will consider applications for smaller amounts from £15,000 and for much larger awards up to £3 million. Grants usually last between 6 months and 3 years, although we will consider longer or shorter timelines. We have 2 deadlines for applications in March and September. In the March round, you can also submit larger applications for grants over £750,000. We call these strategic projects. The Foundation has a 2-stage application process, and it usually takes about 8 months from the submission of your application to a final decision being shared with you. If your application reaches the 2nd stage, it will be peer reviewed. You'll then have a chance to respond to comments and questions from the peer reviewers and from Nuffield Foundation staff before a funding decision is made. A final decision in your application will be made by Nuffield Foundation subject experts and by our trustees. It's very important that you read our in-depth guidance before putting together an application. This contains more information about our funding priorities and how our application and decision-making processes work. Importantly, it also includes information about the assessment criteria which are used by our staff, peer reviewers and trustees throughout the application process. Our guidance also includes key information about our eligibility criteria. We're often asked whether we'll consider applications from third sector and not-for-profit organisations. The answer is yes. We very much welcome this type of application. If your organisation falls into this category, we strongly encourage you to engage with academic partners first to help make sure that your project is convincing in its academic rigour. Another frequently asked question is about our geographical focus. Our primary focus is the United Kingdom, but this may include comparative work between the 4 nations and internationally. However, there's no expectation that all projects have a national or UK-wide focus. We would just expect that the scale of your project reflects the scope of its potential impact. Once you've checked your eligibility and have read our guidance on the application process, you'll be ready to complete an application. There are a few key areas to think about here. To be successful, you need to clearly set out the relevance and importance of your topic and ensure that your chosen methodology is robust. It's vital that you set out your planned methodology clearly. We welcome applications that use quantitative, qualitative and mixed methods, but it's really important for you to explain to us how and why those methods that you have chosen are appropriate and sufficient to answer your research question. We want to make sure that our grant making is inclusive, so as part of the application process, we'll ask to collect diversity monitoring information from you and your team. This is to help us make sure that we're supporting diversity amongst our grant holders. We're also really keen to ensure that we contribute to the development of researchers in our areas of interest. So we want to hear how project staff, particularly those at earlier career stages, will be supported and developed. What's especially important is that your application makes it clear what potential impact your project will have in the medium term, although we understand that pathways to impact may be complex. By impact, we mean the difference your research could make to social wellbeing, whether through changes to policy or practice, by shifting the debate, or by building capacity. If your project is successful, our expert staff can offer support in helping maximise the quality and impact of your project. We do this by offering feedback and input throughout all stages of your project and by bringing each project into the context of our portfolio as a whole. We will also help extend the reach of your project by sharing your project's findings and messages across the Nuffield Foundation's website and social media channels. You can find a lot more information on the areas I've touched on today, as well as examples of successful applications on our website. And we hope to see an application from you in the future.
And welcome back. We do hope you found those presentations useful. Thank you so much for all of the questions you've sent through so far, and please do keep them coming through the Q&A box. Now, here to answer some of your questions, I am joined by Josh Hillman, who is the Director of Education, Alex Beer, who's one of the programme heads in the welfare team, and Ash Patel, who's a programme head in the justice team. So our first question that we're going to kick off with is for Josh, and it's from Diogo Sousa Montero, and Diogo asks, do you only fund research based in the UK, or are other geographies also funded?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say about that is we are a UK-based organisation, so we cover all 4 nations of the UK, and are interested in comparisons and differences. There's quite significant differences in policy and practice in all of our areas of interest across those countries. That's our primary focus. But we're also interested in what we can learn from practice, policies, experiments and interventions overseas, and what we can bring to the UK-based context from those, and comparisons in terms of performance and different types of policies. So we are UK-focused in terms of where we're interested in having an influence, but we draw from internationally. Although we should add that a lot of our work is providing evidence which can be used overseas by governments and by professional bodies overseas.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I've got a question for you, Ash, now, which is from Natalie Sadaka, who asks, how broadly do you define justice? Is it beyond courts and tribunals? Could it include, for example, examining the operation of labour inspection and enforcement bodies?
So it's a really good question, Natalie. Thank you for that. We take quite a broad definition of justice. So while a lot of the research that we fund does look at the formal justice system, so the courts and tribunals, we're also interested in the less formal side of justice as well. I think the sort of underpinning interest is what people's experience of the justice system is. You know, what do they do when they encounter a problem? You know, what is the awareness that they have of the justice system? So in that sense, we do fund work that is broader than just courts and tribunals and the sort of formal justice system.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
And
Go on,
in
Alex.
sort of areas that sort of cross between the justice and the welfare areas of interest, I mean, we're interested in questions like sort of people's access to benefits, and how they might sort of pursue those rights in relation to the benefit system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, We're really interested in the administrative justice system, so decision-making that occurs around people's rights and obligations outside of that formal system.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Next question for you, Alex, if that's okay. So what kind of outputs do we expect? Are non-academic outputs encouraged, such as policy documents, toolkits and reports? And do we expect involvement from non-academic partners in the project design and delivery? And that is from Anna Seislick.
Thank you, Anna. That's a really good question. I'd say our primary focus is on, the difference you are trying to make through your project, thinking very, very clearly about who the audiences are that you want to be able to influence. And so there is no sort of one size fits all to the type of outputs that we expect. And whilst we sort of anticipate that you will be producing sort of academic outputs, and we're sort of very interested in the rigor of your analysis, and that is sort of tested and challenged through presenting at academic events, we are really interested in that interface between sort of the learnings from the research and policy and practice. So yes, we're definitely looking at sort of policy-focused documents, round table discussions with key sort of policymakers or practitioners, and sort of any other innovative ways to sort of get the message across from your findings, to those people that might be able to sort of make a difference with it.
I mean, many of our projects have multiple outputs aimed at different audiences, so some of them will be particularly aimed at building the research field, so they'll be in peer-reviewed journals, but at the same time, all of our projects have at least one output that is fully accessible and readable for that broad audience of policymakers. So many projects have multiple outputs.
Just add one more thing. One of the things that we do emphasise is the communications plan within all of our grants, and we set that out quite early, that each of our grants has a strategic plan around communications to map who the audiences are, what the messages you want to get across to them, and how you're going to do that.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Next question for you, Josh. Do we fund medical research if it fits the education category? And the example that is given is a population study looking at how prematurity affects numeracy in early years education.
So we wouldn't fund medical research as such. There are many other funders with more significant and resources that are directed towards that. But we're really interested in the impact of health-related issues, and prematurity be an example of that, as an influence on outcomes that we're interested in, whether that's in the education system or in the welfare or in justice. And similarly, we're interested in how those might feed back on each other. So we wouldn't fund traditional medical research, but we're interested in those relationships.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Alex, I'm going to direct this question to you, if that's okay, which is Rebecca Goldman asks, she says that we've been tweeting and blogging this year about specific research interests, such as early years research, cost of living, impact of COVID. And she asks, when assessing outline applications against research relevance, will a project addressing these specific issues score more highly, or are we assessing them only based on the broader research interests outlined in our guide for applicants?
Yeah, so when we're assessing outline applications and even our sort of full applications, we are looking at relevance. We're also looking at sort of the conceptual framework underpinning the proposal. We're looking at the methodological approach, the team, the budget, and also its potential to impact and influence. And so we're looking at an outline application across all of those dimensions. You've mentioned relevance, which is one of the sort of first things we look at, and applications that respond to any of the interests that we've set out in our guide for applicants and in any of our tweets will be scoring very, very highly on relevance. And I mean, I think sort of some of the subjects that we tweet about, be they early years, I've sort of trying to develop Nuffield's portfolio on ageing, for example.
I mean, yeah, they are going to score very highly on relevance, but anything that is covered in our guide for applicants will be getting a high relevance score.
I mean, it's worth mentioning that many of the themes that we highlight particularly strongly, so recently, obviously, we had a particular call relating to the COVID pandemic, and we've had emphases on cost of living and geographic inequalities. Those are often shining a particularly strong light on issues that we're already dealing with quite in quite fundamental ways in the rest of our work. They're just particularly highlighting those, but they're not actually presenting many new issues for us. It's just a new angle on us, which at any particular point, as you know, as Alex says, is making them more relevant to current policy debates.
Brilliant, thank you. And this actually links to a question which has come in for me, which is from Juliet Wilson-Thomas, who asks, are we currently funding research into early years policy? Yeah, absolutely. Early years is one of our biggest areas. It's the area that I look after. And we've recently published a blog about our refreshed research interests in this area. So that's very much something that we are interested in. Okay, so here's a question which I'm just going to ask any of you to take. And I'll read it out, and you can let me know who wants to come back. So it says, the understandable lack of feedback on applications makes it hard to work out where we went wrong when we have applied. What do applicants commonly get wrong, or what features are missing from their projects that Nuffield want to see? Who wants to take that tricky one?
I mean, I'd say the most common thing is possibly trying to do too much in a single project. Quite often, with a view to trying to make a proposal as sort of comprehensive as possible, and also taking the different stages of the sort of research chain. For example, in the development of a new intervention, and then evaluating and trialling it at a reasonable level scale. People try to do all of that in one go, or they try to do combine quantitative work, qualitative work, and a literature review before maybe the literature review has highlighted what the quantitative or qualitative work should be. Those sorts of things. So I'd say that's probably my number one piece of feedback.
I think I'd second that. Ash, Alex, anything you want to add on that?
I think one of the other common reasons that we might not carry forward an application is the lack of clarity about the pathway to impact, or how it might lead to change, and sort of emphasis on really understanding how doing the research and how that then translated into something that policymakers, practitioners can use is quite often sort of a weakness in applications.
Anything to add on that, Alex?
I think Josh and Ash have covered it.
Brilliant, thank you. Ash, I've got a question for you from Saeed Iqbal, who asks, can you apply to more than one area for funding? So as well as education, justice and welfare.
Short answer, yes. You can apply discreetly to each of our areas, or you can, one of the things that we would like to see is more interdisciplinary work, and work that bans all of our, or multiple of our programs. So the only thing I think we would look out for is that you're not necessarily stretching yourself too far. So having 3 applications in at the same time, probably not the most strategic use of your time. But yeah, short answer.
Yeah, and so sort of just going back to sort of Josh's previous response, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you try and span all 3 of our domains to think that it might lead to a sort of more relevant application, because there's a risk there of you spreading yourself too thinly. And on a very, very practical note, we do ask people when they're submitting their application to tick one of education, welfare, or justice. Now, we're a relatively small team. We work very, very closely together, and ticking that box is just a funnel to decide which team will look at it in the first instance. But where there is a sort of cross-domain interest, we'll be sharing that application amongst the relevant teams. So your application will be likely looked at in the first instance, by people sitting across domains, if there is that cross-domain relevance.
There's some clear areas that absolutely span our areas of interest. So, for example, in youth justice, the trajectories and outcomes for young people who've entered the youth justice system, and how education can provide a route back into potential employment, and that's one area. Or skills development as being at the interface between school and the world of work, as well as another one that spans our education and welfare interests. So there's many, and those are of particular interest to us. We're trying hard to not see these as separate programs, but as being, three principal areas of interest.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got a couple of methodological ones coming up, so I'm going to ask them both and see who wants to take them. The first one is that methodology may not be 100% fixed at the start of a project when it's an explorative multi-stage project. How would you recommend explaining a robust methodology in this case? And that's from Kim Turner, so that's the first methodology one. The second methodology one is, with mixed methodologies that can incorporate can you incorporate creative research methodologies alongside qualitative methods? So who wants to kick us off on those two qualitative methodology questions? So the first one was about how we explain a robust methodology when the methodology isn't fixed from the start.
I think we'd want to just have that sort of clear starting position sort of set out, and the process that you are going to take to refine the methodology as the programme of work gets underway, and sort of demonstrate that you've got both the right skills within the team to enable you to adapt accordingly, and often we will also look at the supports, the wider supports you have around the team, for example, through your advisory group setup, that all provide the sort of necessary levels of support and challenge as you try and sort of navigate your way through refining the methodology.
But we've got lots of examples of projects where during the course of the project they've developed new methodological strands, they've encountered new data sets that can be brought to bear. Through the process of doing the analysis, they've had new ideas of ways of addressing the research questions. So there is some flexibility, and we're very open to that. We recognise that at the point at which people apply, they might not have had full sight of the potential of the data to do these sorts of analyses. So there is some flexibility there.
Brilliant, thank you. Just got a couple more methodological questions coming up, so I'm going to get those in as quickly as we can. Josh, one for you about RCTs. Simona Tenaglia asks, are RCTs financed?
We do fund RCTs. In fact, some of our most successful projects have been randomised controlled trials. Particularly in our education area, it's been one of our sort of our strengths in that area. Not large-scale RCTs, I should mention, because the size of our funding just doesn't allow for that. But modestly sized RCTs that can then be scaled up and funded by organisations like the Education Endowment Foundation, who have taken on projects that we've shown promise from smaller scale RCTs with great success. But we recognise and value RCTs as a methodology, and we think it's important in all of our areas.
Thank you very much. And just related to that, do we fund secondary data analysis and evidence reviews, or just primary research?
Again, many of our projects undertake secondary data analyses. We're particularly interested in the use of large-scale administrative data sets. We're interested in analyses that use the big birth cohort studies and those that link all of those sorts of data sets. So a big chunk of our funding goes to secondary data analysis, and I think you mentioned evidence reviews as well. We don't think there's enough existing literature reviews or evidence reviews of what's already there. It's something that other funders don't fund enough of, and we would like to do more of that. But I would say, just as a point for our viewers, that we don't see that many applications that are just looking at review of new evidence, because there's a lot of incentives, particularly in the university sector, to be continually doing new research rather than taking stock of the evidence that's already there.
Thank you. So from methodologies onto topics, and this one's for you. Go on.
Capture all of the methodology questions. I think there was a
The creative methodology
Oh,
one.
yes.
Yes. Who wants to take that one, or would you like a reminder of what that was? Do you want to?
Sorry.
Yes, of course, absolutely. So the question was, with mixed methodologies, can you include the incorporation of creative research methodologies alongside qualitative methods?
Yes, I think our overarching approach is we're really interested in understanding methodologies that match the research question. So as long as there's a methodological need for it, and this is where the conceptual framework of the research comes into play, we would certainly consider that. I suppose this does link to that initial question about methodology, about how tightly defined methods need to be and methodology needs to be from the outset. And I think this is where we would need to look at if you can't provide the necessary detail of the methods specifically, having the right infrastructure and framework for the delivery of research.
Brilliant, thank you. I've just got a couple of questions about topics now. So we've only got a few minutes left. So Ash, one for you. Under the justice category, would research looking at how the judicial and legal reform influences people's lives be appropriate?
Yes. Again, one of our sort of priority areas is we understand that the justice system is under a current reform programme, and we're really interested in understanding what that actually means for the people that are going through and using the system. So, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And a topic one for you, Alex. Is the Nuffield Foundation interested in funding research in the area of climate change and the transition to net zero? And that is from Ellen Killick.
Thank you, Ellen. Yes, we are. We're particularly interested in the impact of climate change and the transition to net zero on the lives of individuals and their well-being, and also on community well-being. Which individuals and communities might be most vulnerable to the climate crisis, to the transition, and what are the mitigations that you might have in place to sort of reduce the risks that those vulnerable individuals face. We've got a couple of grants that are looking at the transition to net zero at the moment. But yeah, this is certainly an area in which we're keen to fund.
And just to butt in there, I would note that we haven't actually funded any area in terms of any projects in relation to climate change and education, but we would be interested in what the implications are for the education system and the extent to which the curriculum is fit for purpose in preparing young people for the effects of climate change. So that's just something that we're thinking about longer term and would be interested in people's ideas and projects around.
Brilliant, thank you very much. We've only got a minute left, so time for maybe one or possibly two quick questions. This one can go to anyone. What are your expectations in terms of the impact and applicability of research outputs? Who wants to take that one?
So I think the key thing is that you have thought realistically about the opportunities for influence or for impact. We are not when we talk about impact, we're not necessarily expecting to see immediate policy or practice change. I mean, you might be contributing to sort of improving understanding, sort of widening the knowledge base, sort of creating the conditions for change at some point in the future. So, I mean, just be sort of realistic about your ambitions there, but have thought about that pathway sort of to change, to potential change.
I mean, many of the areas where we've had most influence as a funder, and the work that we've funded has had influence, have been very slow burn over a period of, often over a period of 10 years, 15 years, have filtered through into research and policy thinking, and nothing has changed. Very few things have changed overnight as a result of the research that we funded. So we recognise that influence is a very slow process in the areas that we're interested in. So we're patient as a funder.
Brilliant, and thank you very much. On that note, I'm afraid we have run out of time. Thank you so much for everyone, for all of your questions. We haven't in any way had a chance to get through them all. So what we're going to do is pull lots of your questions together and put a frequently asked questions sheet up on our website. And if you've got a burning question that you've not yet had a chance to answer, please do email us. Our email address is in the chat box. We very much look forward to hearing from you. Please do send us in your feedback, but more importantly, we'd love to hear from you if you've got a great idea for a research project that fits into some of the areas that we've just been talking about today. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us today.